Didn't want to have to do it. I was trying to play nice, but y'all forced my hand. So, here we go. It is Rings of Power season once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are seeing so many posts about Rings of Power season 4 all over Twitter. If you pay attention to Twitter even in the slightest, you are probably seeing Rings of Power stuff everywhere. There is a ton of information coming out about Rings of Power season 4, and of course, the Tolkien community is once again in arms about it. And that is something that is people that genuinely goes like drives me nuts, because y'all haters don't seem to know where to stop it. Like, you guys genuinely don't know when to stop talking, and it blows my mind. And a lot of this comes down to just simply really dumb reasoning. I am very much just, going through Twitter trying to find people who are excited about Rings of Power, and so many people are going and looking at the show and they are like, oh man, it's an affront to Tolkien, it's not following the lore accurately at all. Well, let's take a look here and let's talk about this one, okay? So, we're going to be doing a deep look into Rings of Power, both on the lore side of things and comparing it to everybody's most beloved series that people will continue to talk about all the time as being the best film adaptation of any book whatsoever. Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Now, quick little disclaimer, I do want to just say that I love both things. I love Peter Jackson's trilogy. Peter Jackson's trilogy was my gateway to Tolkien. So, to say that I don't like Peter Jackson's trilogy would just be completely and utterly not correct. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands that, because I'm not trying to come here and say that I don't like Peter Jackson's trilogy. I am just coming here to say that you cannot hold Peter Jackson to this high, most faithful adaptation. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get started on this one. Y'all are going to get really mad at me, but you know what? I'm through caring. I simply am ready to start war over this. All right, let's get into it. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is Peter Jackson's Book 2 movie adaptation and the accuracy within it. So, Peter Jackson had the rights for the 3 Lord of the Rings books as well as The Hobbit. And so, maybe he didn't have The Hobbit later. I'm not going to quote on that real quick before I get into the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. Either way, he had the rights for the Lord of the Rings books. Let's talk about some of the biggest changes that were made from the books to the movies. All right, so the first thing that we are going to talk about here is the some of the characters that were changed or added and omitted from the book, from the movies, I should say. So, first off, in Fellowship of the Ring, we have this glorious tale of Arwen coming to the rescue for Frodo after he has been stabbed by the Witch King on Weathertop. Yeah, sorry, that right there, that didn't happen in the books. It was actually Glorfindel. Glorfindel is a character that shows up very much in the Silmarillion during the events of the fall of Gondolin, and he comes back in the Third Age and rescues Frodo, and there is a talk about him being a part of the Fellowship of the Ring, in which he is actually denied entry to the Fellowship because of the fact that he is so powerful that Elrond does not believe that he would be a good fit for the secrecy needed for the mission that was needed. Okay? So there's one major change that honestly I really don't like, because I really enjoy Glorfindel, and I think that the story of Aragorn and Arwen is so beautiful that I understand why they made the change, but also the story of Aragorn and Arwen is just so beautiful that it really deserves better than what it was given. I think that the whole areas where honestly, Aragorn was even changed is completely different and not originally how Tolkien would have wanted, because Aragorn is also a very vastly different character, and we'll talk about that right now since I'm on that soapbox. In the books, Aragorn is talked about being somebody who is ready to become King of Gondor. In fact, he is given the sword Andúril of the Flame of the West before he even leaves Rivendell with the rest of the Fellowship. And so people are going to then praise Aragorn in the movies. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Viggo Mortensen. Viggo Mortensen did a beautiful portrayal, and Viggo Mortensen honestly can do no wrong. I do not want to say anything about Viggo Mortensen here. I am purely talking about the character and how he was changed. Aragorn in the books was ready to embrace his role as the future King of Gondor. He embraced the role of being Isildur's heir. But in the movies, you blatantly hear him say that he does not even want the power of being the King of Gondor. That's something that he is not interested in the slightest. There are two major contradictions here between what Peter Jackson does and what Tolkien originally writes the character of Aragorn. Two very different moments that happen in that narrative, and it really just changes the core of who Aragorn is, because it really adds this extra level of struggle to the point where he doesn't ever really fully accept his fate until either nobody ever really knows, but the only time you really kind of know that he's like understanding what he needs to do is when he's given the sword before he takes the road to the Dimwalt into the Paths of the Dead. Either way, those are two very different two very major changes for one of the most significant characters in all of Tolkien's Legendarium. And that's a really massive change that a lot of people would say, if you would have looked at Peter Jackson's movies back in the day, you would have looked at that and you would have thought, wow, that is an affront to Tolkien. Tolkien would be rolling in his grave for changing such a key character such as Aragorn. So those are just like two major things right there between just Arwen and Glorfindel and that story being changed, and then the character of Aragorn. And then we have a ton of omission of other characters, such as Tom Bombadil. So much of the story from when Frodo leaves the Shire on his way to Bree is completely omitted from the story. We don't get the Old Forest. We don't get the Barrow Downs. We don't get Tom Bombadil. Chapters upon chapters of information is completely omitted. Now, a lot of people understand that this was omitted because of storytelling purposes, and I get that. But that is a big chunk of the story that is completely taken out. And so that is another thing that we have to look at. Now, as we jump into the next movie, we have the Two Towers. Okay, and the one thing that I'm not even really gonna that everybody knows is the elves coming in at Helm's Deep. While it is cinematically one of the coolest moments that ever happens within the Two Towers, it is not in the books. The elves do not show up. And this is something that people nowadays would consider woke, because the whole point of it was to emphasize and remember the alliance of the races of elves and men from way back during the Second Age that's talked about in the prologue very briefly, but how there even says that he has come to honor that allegiance. But when you look at the actual story, that's not there. In fact, all that the elves the elves being there only adds a little bit of hope to an already hopeless situation. The men of Rohan were in this situation where there was no way that they could have survived unless some sort of miracle happened, and the elves showing up gave them some sort of feeling of a miracle, and it didn't really work out anyway. So all it really does is just provide this set of a really cool cinematic moment of elves showing up for literally all of them to die and nothing else happen. Like, we never actually hear of any elves surviving the battle, which means that there's a company of, let's say, 200 elves that show up and they just end up all dead. Like, they don't show any of what happens to them. So those are a few changes. Another change we can look at is as we jump into The Return of the King. In The Return of the King, there's the whole bit of Frodo being tricked by Gollum into temporarily sending Sam away. And it becomes this very climactic moment of Frodo telling Sam, "You can't help me anymore. Go home." In the books, That never happens. They go all the way to Mount Doom together. They don't have this falling out. And unfortunately, that means we don't have the heroic moment of Sam returning to Frodo's side to fight Shelob. Sam still does fight Shelob, but you don't get that moment of knowing whether or not he's going to show up. And that's something that is completely different. Now, another big difference here is in the Paths of the Dead, as I talked about before, with Aragorn taking the road to the Dimwalt. In the movies, the Army of the Dead basically wins the entire Battle of Pelennor Fields. That is something that it's not even subtle about it. I mean, you literally see an army of ghosts climbing on top of Oliphants and taking them down, and that is very different from the books. In the book, Aragorn uses them to terrify the Corsairs of Umbar at the port city of Pelargir, and that's it. Aragorn doesn't actually bring them to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. You never see the Army of the Dead at Pelennor Fields. They aren't there. Once the Corsairs of Umbar are terrified in the city of Pelargir, and they all take off running, Aragorn releases them from their oath, and you never see them again. Another very massive change within the story. Okay? And then we get to the epic climax of the story, the destruction of the ring. In the movie, you get this very dramatic moment with some of the coolest music I think I've ever heard in any movie ever, where Frodo and Gollum are wrestling for the ring. They're struggling for it, and they both fall over the edge, and Frodo grabs on, but Gollum, holding on to the ring, falls into the lava. That doesn't happen in the book. In the book, Gollum just has a happy little dance and slips off the edge and falls and dies, and that's how the ring is destroyed. It is significantly more anticlimactic. Now, again, you could say, oh, that's a fine change because it was something that was used on the basis of cinema. However, if you look at the key theme of what Tolkien was communicating in that moment, it's very different, because Tolkien is trying to communicate that the ring was so powerful that it doesn't matter who you are. Even Frodo at the very end succumbs to the ring's influence, and the only reason that even happens is because Gollum falls into lava, not because of some physical altercation, not because of some heroic moment by Frodo, but Frodo actually fails in the end. And it just so happens that Gollum falls. You could even say, because I think that there's somewhere, don't quote me on this, but you could say that Eru Ilúvatar himself even goes and intervenes to cause Gollum to fall, which has this whole thing about divine intervention that you could talk about within that whole message, that it's only through divine intervention that you can truly be rid of such an incredible burden of one as the Ring of Power. But I'm not going to go on that soapbox because I will start preaching, and we all know nobody wants to hear that right now. Anyway, those are just a brief glimpse at some of the changes, and this video is only 15 minutes long. And the crazy part too, if you really want to talk about the real information, like the real clincher about Peter Jackson's movies in regards to them in the books, Christopher Tolkien himself, the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, the one who went back after his father had died and published the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, he did not like Peter Jackson's film. He hated them. He felt that they reduced his father's profound philosophical literature into superficial action movies. He believed that the films, quote, eviscerated the book, and that Hollywood's commercialization stripped the work of its intellectual and aesthetic weight. You miss so much of what the original message of the books was trying to communicate, because it was so focused on battles and an action movie that it overshadowed the world building. It overshadowed the small moments that make The Lord of the Rings so powerful. Okay? And there's so much about it because Christopher Tolkien just didn't enjoy the movies at all. And so if Christopher Tolkien doesn't like them, then what is something, then why are we defending it so hard? Okay, why are we going through and saying that Peter Jackson is the hero of Tolkien when the son of Tolkien himself didn't even like them and he thought that they were horrible? Like, that's something that is like something that just, it genuinely blows my mind that Rings of Power haters will talk about how great Peter Jackson's movies are, but they won't talk about how much even Christopher Tolkien himself didn't like them. Okay, now, this is the thing that I'm talking about here in regards to specifically Peter Jackson's trilogy. Peter Jackson's trilogy is one that a lot of people will look at as a great set of movies. I mean, The Return of the King has won the most Oscars of any film ever. And I don't deny that. But if you are going to be so torn up about its book accuracy, then you have to be torn up about the book accuracy of Peter Jackson's movies. You can't freak out about the book accuracy of Rings of Power if you aren't going to talk about the book accuracy of Peter Jackson's movies as well. Okay. Now, moving on to Rings of Power. In my hand right here, these are my copies of The Lord of the Rings. Okay. Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, The Return of the King. All right here in their glory. All. This is what Peter Jackson had to work with for rights for his 3 movies. This. Right here. The Tolkien estate had given The Rings of Power is based off of the appendices of The Return of the King, which is this chunk of pages right here. Okay? Amazon paid $250 million for that small chunk of information. And in the appendices of Rings of Power, or of The Return of the King, we don't get a lot of information about the actual story of the Rings of Power in here. We get the information about Eregion being founded. We get Sauron, alarmed by the growing power, chooses Mordor's land and begins a building of Barad-dûr. Like, we get all of that information in tiny little chunks in a timeline. We don't get a full comprehensive narrative of the story of the Rings of Power. You know what that means? That means plot lines have to be filled in. Okay? So that means that creative liberties are forced to be taken, such as the stories of Arondir in the Southlands, such as a lot of the stories of the dwarves with Durin and Disa, and the Harfoot plotline. There's a lot that needs to be added to try and tell a comprehensive story. And Rings of Power, Amazon is doing everything that they could with the rights that they had from these 3 books, because the Tolkien estate did not give up the rights to the Silmarillion. They refused it. And with them refusing to give up the rights to the Silmarillion, Rings of Power were trying to create something that is completely different than what Peter Jackson had created. And that is something because they wanted to continue to bring Tolkien stories to life in an adaptation. And for some reason, we're deciding that that's a bad thing? we're deciding that bringing a adaptation of something so many people love is a bad thing. I I genuinely don't understand the mindset of the Rings of Power haters that are so fast to jump onto the hate train and say that Rings of Power is an affront to Tolkien when there's when it's still just more Tolkien we get on screen. Because up until we had Rings of Power, the last thing we had was the Hobbit trilogy. And so this is something that continues to blow my mind within the community. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about the stories of the Rings of Power and how they don't follow the lore, because everybody knows that. I'm not wanting to rehash those things because people will continue to go and talk about how much Rings of Power doesn't follow the lore and focusing on that. Now, I'm not going to say that the Rings of Power is a perfect show. I'm not saying that at all. I understand it's not a perfect show. I don't think it's a perfect show. There are a lot of things about the show that I genuinely don't like. Season 1, I rated as a 6 out of 10. It's actually, the more I've watched Season 2, the more I've actually come to not like Season 1 of Rings of Power. But I'm not going to go on that soapbox, okay? I'm not just like, I want us to make sure that when we are critiquing the show and we are expressing things that we don't like about the show, that we are expressing things that we don't like for the right reasons. For things like, I don't enjoy the pacing of Season 1, or there are things that they did that pulled away from the overarching plot. That's fine. Those are true, genuine critiques. But to say the things that have been said, like Rings of Power is quote-unquote woke, or to say that it is not faithful to the lore in the slightest, is so far off the mark that you guys are just jumping to a conclusion. And by you guys, I mean Rings of Power haters specifically. That Rings of Power haters are jumping to a conclusion about the show because it's not their Tolkien. Hey guys, post-production's Ojulix here. I just want to clarify something with this last point that I made when I was talking about Rings of Power not being faithful to the lore. I know that Rings of Power does take significantly more creative liberties. The thing that I'm mainly talking about in terms of its faithfulness is the way that it still chooses to try and create Tolkien's world. It still keeps the bulk of what Tolkien is trying to build within his world the same. It keeps the beauty of the elves. It keeps the beauty of the dwarves. It keeps the evilness of Sauron. All of that remains faithful. And that's the kinds of things that we're talking about when I'm talking about the faithfulness to the lore specifically. Yes, I know it doesn't get everything correct from the Silmarillion because it doesn't have the rights to the Silmarillion and therefore can't use that as a reference point. The main thing I'm talking about is the core themes within Tolkien's world. That's really all that I'm wanting to talk about with the faithfulness. I hope that clears things up, guys. Back to the video. That's a phrase I have heard thrown around. Tolkien, the only Tolkien that is there is the books. It's how it is. It's how it will be. The only Tolkien that's there is the books. That is true Tolkien and nothing else. This isn't going to be a true comprehensive video talking about the Rings of Power without talking about the numbers. So, let's get into the numbers here. This is an article by The Traverse, Return of the Sting, and it is this was written in 2024, shortly after the release of Rings of Power Season 2. Okay, So Rings of Power Season 2 had gained 55 million global viewers ahead of the finale. 55 million. Okay. The first 2 episodes of Season 1 generated 1.25 billion viewing minutes in their first 4 days, which breaks down to around 10 million viewers. There was a lot of people watching the show. Ahead of the season 1 finale, Amazon had said that the show was approaching 100 million viewers. Okay? And people will look at the comparison. We're looking at a show with 100 million viewers. People will look at that as at the show dropping from 100 million to about 55 as a massive drop. About 50% of their viewers. Okay? But when you look at any content trend report, the difference between that of a show that people start versus a show that people complete is about 48%. So no matter how good your show is, on average, about 48% of people watching your show are going to finish it. And this is from a content report trend that was published on May of 2025. And so that's something, and that's shows with a season 1 of 3 to 6 episodes. Meanwhile, seasons of 11 to 15 episodes were showing an average of a 26% completion rate. So a major drop in an audience is expected. You're expected to drop over 50% of your audience within your seasons. So Rings of Power, people talk about it as if it's something that people aren't watching, but it does nothing but follow your typical trends, but sits at 50 million, like 55 million viewers, and we're going to look at something like that and call it a failure? Rings of Power continued to break records within its show and continued to be the top running show on Amazon Prime for a long time. And it's still been one of the most popular shows. The problem is not the numbers. The problem is how you report them. Rings of Power is a genuine successful show. It is just being reported and talked about as if it has been a bad show this whole time. And this is the information that comes out because it's the way that people want to report the information. So, I guess from looking at all of this, this is something that we can look at for us Rings of Power fans and be good to know that our show is still good. Our show is still a very, very well done show. It is a show that people like. It is a show that everybody really, really likes. It's a show that people are wanting. And so many people will get so focused on just the things that they don't like because they want to push their own version of Tolkien instead of looking at what is the true esque of what is happening on Rings of Power, which is that people don't want to see a version of Tolkien that is not what they want. And that is what the real problem is with the Rings of Power. that's going to be it for this video, guys. I know that I just went on a incredible rant and talked about a lot for about 30 minutes pre-editing, so I'm going to hopefully try and edit this down to be a little bit more comprehensive and flow a little bit better, as well as just provide some visual aids in my editing. So this is going to be really fun to work on, and it's going to be interesting, but I'm excited to kind of see what this video is going to bring about, because I'm here to stir the pot, and I'm here to make sure that if we're giving critiques, we're giving the right critiques. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I do want to give all of the love to my Ko-Fi supporters. You guys are the ones that help to make this channel possible. If you would like to support on Ko-Fi, please make sure that you check the links down in the description below. And with that, you are loved, you are valued, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we will see you right back here next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.